The observation chamber hummed with a low mechanical drone that did little to mask the tension crackling through the air. Lieutenant Mara Venn sat cross-legged on the reinforced floor, her tablet forgotten beside her as she watched the Kraith cubs tumble over one another in their play. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed almost endearing, until one caught the light just right, revealing rows of crystalline teeth and claws that could shred titanium plating. The Galactic Council had been explicit in their warnings. The Kraith were apex predators, their species having conquered 3 star systems through sheer ferocity before agreeing to the treaty. They didn't form bonds outside their pack structure. They certainly didn't trust outsiders, especially not the soft-skinned humans who had only recently joined the interstellar community. But Mara had volunteered anyway. Someone needed to study their young, to understand how a species so violent could raise offspring without tearing each other apart. The data would be invaluable for diplomatic relations, her superiors had said. What they hadn't said was that she'd be the first non-Kraith to enter a nursery den in over 4 centuries. The adult Kraith lined the walls of the chamber, their 6 eyes tracking her every movement. Their pelts ranged from deep obsidian to storm gray, each marking denoting rank and bloodline. She could feel their stares like physical weight measuring her, waiting for her to make a mistake that would justify their ancient instincts. Kor approached first, as he always did. The eldest cub moved with a confidence that belied his youth, his developing mane already showing the silver threads that marked him as future pack leader. He circled her slowly, his primary eyes studying her face while his secondary eyes watched her hands. "You're different," he had said during their first meeting, his translator rendering his growls into flat mechanical standard. "You smell wrong. Weak." Mara had smiled at that despite the 3 armed guards stationed outside the chamber. "Maybe," she'd replied. "But I'm here to learn about you. Would you teach me?" The question had puzzled him. Teaching was for packmates, for blood, not for prey species who wandered into dens where they didn't belong. But over the following weeks something shifted. Kor began to answer her questions, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. He showed her how the cubs practiced their hunting stances, how they communicated through subsonic rumbles that her equipment barely registered. He even let her touch his mane once, a gesture that made the adult Kraith snarl with alarm until the pack leader silenced them with a sharp bark. Today, the cubs were restless. A storm raged outside the facility, and even through meters of reinforced walls, the atmospheric pressure changes affected them. They snapped at each other, their play growing rougher, more aggressive. Mara made notes documenting how their behavior changed, how the adults responded with warning growls that kept them from crossing certain lines. Then Sela, one of the younger cubs, broke from the group. She was smaller than the others, her pelt still showing the spotted pattern of infancy. She had been watching Mara all morning with her head tilted in that curious way that reminded Mara painfully of the pets she'd left behind on Earth. Sela approached slowly, her body low to the ground in a posture Mara had learned meant uncertainty. The cub's translator was still learning, her words coming out in broken fragments. "Warm, you?" Mara held very still. The guards outside had raised their weapons. The adult Kraith had gone rigid, every predatory instinct focused on this moment. One wrong move, one sign of aggression, and the situation would deteriorate faster than she could blink. "Yes," Mara said softly. "I'm warm." Sela crept closer, her nose twitching as she processed Mara's scent. Then, before anyone could react, the cub climbed into Mara's lap, circled twice the way young creatures do, and settled against her chest. The room exploded with sound. Adult Kraith surged forward, their bellows shaking the walls. The guards' weapons charged with a high-pitched whine. Kor placed himself between Mara and the nearest adult, his small body tense but his stance protective. But then Sela began to purr, a deep, rumbling sound that Mara felt in her bones. The cub's breathing slowed, her 6 eyes sliding closed one by one. Within moments she was asleep, completely vulnerable in the arms of what should have been prey. The silence that followed was absolute. The pack leader stepped forward, his massive frame moving with predatory grace. He towered over Mara, close enough that she could see her reflection in his obsidian eyes, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. One swipe of his claws would end her. Instead, he lowered his head, bringing his face level with hers. His secondary eyes studied the sleeping cub while his primary eyes locked onto Mara's. When he spoke, his voice bypassed the translator, the subsonic rumble carrying meaning that her human brain somehow understood. "She has been claimed," he said, and the phrase rippled through the assembled Kraith like a sacred incantation. "The soft one has been claimed." Mara's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her breathing steady, her arms secure around the sleeping cub. "I don't understand." Kor moved to her side, his young voice solemn. "When a cub chooses trust, the pack must honor it. Sela has given you her vulnerability. You are pack-bound now. This has never happened with an outsider." The pack leader straightened, and something that might have been respect flickered in his ancient eyes. "Your kind does not hunt, human. You do not have our claws, our teeth, our strength. We thought you weak." He paused, his gaze dropping to the sleeping cub. "But perhaps the greatest strength is being safe enough for the young to sleep." As the adult Kraith slowly returned to their positions along the walls, Mara sat cradling Sela, understanding with absolute clarity that humanity had just secured something no treaty could guarantee. Not through weapons or territory or shows of force, but through the simple act of being trusted by something small and innocent. Outside the chamber, her commanding officer would later try to quantify it in reports, a diplomatic breakthrough, a cultural milestone. But Mara knew the truth was simpler and more profound. Sometimes the fiercest predators in the galaxy needed to know that gentleness existed, and sometimes being human was enough.